Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what has just happened in the last 7 days is not a weapons transfer. It is not a logistical resupply. It is not a routine replenishment of munitions between allied forces that share a common supply chain. What happened last week, quietly and without a single Western headline capturing its full significance, is a fundamental and structural shift in the balance of deterrence across the entire northern front of the Middle East. And the people most professionally responsible for understanding this shift are the ones most aggressively, most publicly, pretending that it did not happen in the way that it happened. Everyone is focused on the diplomatic negotiations. Everyone is asking about ceasefire language, about what Washington said, about what Tel Aviv denied, about whether some framework for stabilization is possible given current political conditions. But that is not the real story this week. The real story is what arrived, what was unloaded, what was quietly distributed, according to multiple regional intelligence sources, across a network of prepared positions that Western and Israeli surveillance has been monitoring with mounting alarm for the past 72 hours. What I am about to walk you through in the next 18 minutes is being actively analyzed inside American military planning circles right now, today, as you are watching this, and the conclusions being reached in those circles are not comfortable ones. They are not the conclusions that the official statements reflect. Stay with me, because by the end of this analysis, the phrase Iron Dome will mean something qualitatively different to you than it meant when you sat down to watch this. Subscribe now if you have not already, because this is not the kind of analysis you will find in the mainstream media. This is what the cables say. This is what the satellite imagery confirms. And this is what the official statements are desperately, and I think transparently, trying to obscure. Let us begin with context, because geography and military architecture matter here enormously, and without understanding both clearly, the significance of last week's delivery cannot be properly assessed by anyone trying to make sense of what they are being told. The Iron Dome system was designed for a specific threat environment. It was engineered, developed with substantial American technical and financial support over more than a decade, and deployed as the centerpiece of a layered defensive architecture designed primarily to counter short-range rockets. Rockets with flat trajectories, limited maneuverability, and predictable flight paths. The interception mathematics at the core of the system are based on that threat profile. The radar signature analysis, the launch to intercept timing calculations, the entire operational doctrine built around Iron Dome, all of it was calibrated against a weapon system that has now been effectively superseded in the hands of the forces it was designed to defend against. According to military technical publications reviewed by Western defense analysts, the system achieves interception rates between 80 and 90% against conventional Katyusha-type rockets under controlled conditions. That number has been repeated so many times in so many official contexts that it has acquired the status of political gospel. It is cited whenever anyone raises questions about the adequacy of the northern defensive posture. What it does not account for, what it has never been designed to account for, is a fundamental change in the nature of the projectile itself. And that is specifically what last week's delivery was about. The northern front, the terrain running from the Bekaa Valley through the Lebanese hill country toward the Israeli border positions, the elevation differentials, the engagement distances, the time to impact windows that define this geography, all of these factors change the interception equation in ways that the Iron Dome architecture was never designed to handle at scale and under saturation conditions. The engineers who built this system understood the geography. The doctrine was always that Iron Dome is one layer of a multi-layer defense. What changed last week is the calculus of that first layer in ways that cascade upward through every layer above it. Now let us talk about what Hezbollah actually received, because the details matter and the mainstream coverage has been conspicuously lacking in exactly those details. Announcement number 1, precision-guided munitions with active terminal maneuvering capability. And this one matters more than anything else being discussed in the security briefing circulating in Western defense establishments this week. According to reporting confirmed by multiple regional intelligence sources cited in European security and defense publications over the past 4 days, the delivery included a significant quantity of what analysts are describing as fourth-generation guided rockets equipped with terminal phase correction systems. These are not the rockets of 2006. These are not even the rockets of 2021. The significant distinction, the one that makes the Iron Dome vulnerability real rather than theoretical, is a guidance package that activates in the final seconds of flight, allowing the projectile to make deliberate course corrections after it has already entered the Iron Dome engagement envelope. Think carefully about what this means operationally. The Iron Dome interception system calculates a predicted impact point the moment its radar detects a launch. That calculation drives the intercept trajectory of the responding missile. The interceptor is already committed to a flight path before it reaches anywhere near the target. If the target changes its own flight path during the terminal phase, even a lateral shift of 15 to 20 meters, which these guidance systems are capable of, the intercept probability collapses from above 80% to somewhere between 30 and 50%, depending on engagement range and radar update cycle speed. The physics of intercept geometry become, in the language that military analysts use when they are being honest about it, fundamentally non-trivial. That is technical understatement for, the system you built may not reliably stop this class of weapon at operational volumes. Commander-level assessments from American naval analysts who have reviewed similar Iranian-supplied guidance technology in adjacent theaters have described the challenge in exactly these terms in publications that have not received the prominence they deserve. The interception mathematics change when the target is maneuvering. The system was not designed for maneuvering targets at the volumes now present in the Northern Threat Inventory. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2. The quantities involved in last week's delivery make saturation not merely a theoretical concern, but a viable and probably already planned tactical doctrine. And this is the specific part that the official Israeli and American statements are most carefully and consistently avoiding. A single precision-guided munition with terminal maneuvering is a concern for military planners. 100 of them, launched in coordinated salvos designed from the outset to overwhelm the engagement capacity of any single Iron Dome battery, is a strategic problem of a different order. According to assessments published in Defense Security Asia and referenced by analysts monitoring Lebanese logistics corridors over the past 18 months, the delivery last week was not a symbolic gesture of continued commitment. It was a deliberate, calculated investment in salvo capacity, in the ability to launch enough rounds quickly enough against enough simultaneous coordinates that no current version of Iron Dome deployed in the Northern Theater can handle the total engagement load. Iron Dome batteries have a finite reload time. The interceptor missiles themselves require resupply that takes hours under field conditions. The engagement radar can track a limited number of simultaneous targets before its prioritization algorithms begin making triage decisions, deciding automatically which incoming rounds to attempt interception and which to classify as acceptable losses from the defensive perspective. When the incoming volume exceeds the system's engagement ceiling, that triage becomes automatic. It is built into the software. It is a design feature, not a flaw. But the locations that fall below the priority threshold in a saturation scenario are simply not defended in that engagement window. That is the operational reality that the delivery last week was designed to exploit. The engineers who built Iron Dome understood this limitation. The doctrine was always that Iron Dome operates as one layer of a multi-layer defense, supplemented by other systems, by active offensive operations, by intelligence-driven preemption of launch capabilities. What changed last week is the calculus of that first layer under conditions of saturation fire from maneuvering munitions. When the first layer faces a threat it was not designed to counter, at volumes it was not designed to handle, the entire architecture of layered defense begins to strain in ways that the public statements simply do not acknowledge and cannot acknowledge given the political requirements of the moment. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the policy implications become impossible to honestly ignore. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this is the revelation that almost nobody in the mainstream commentary is connecting correctly or with sufficient seriousness. The delivery last week is not the end of the transfer pipeline. It is a proof of concept delivery. It is the first validated tranche of a larger and more systematically planned program. And the significance of what arrived is not only the hardware currently positioned in Lebanon. The significance is what the successful delivery confirms about the viability of the supply channel itself. There is a clear and well-documented logic in how these capability transfer programs are managed operationally. You do not deliver the full inventory in a single movement that creates maximum interdiction risk. You deliver enough to demonstrate operational viability across the full logistics chain. You establish the maintenance protocols with trained personnel on both ends. You test the supply chain under conditions that approximate real operational stress. You document the interdiction risks you successfully navigated. And then, once confidence is established in the logistics architecture from origin to destination, the volume scales. What arrived last week represents the validated first tranche of a larger program whose subsequent tranches will be planned with the lessons of this delivery incorporated. Regional security publications monitoring Iranian logistics networks have noted specifically that the route used for this delivery bypassed several interdiction points that Israeli and American assets had previously targeted with some success. The fact that it worked, that the delivery arrived intact and was distributed to prepared positions, is a data point that will be used to justify and calibrate and expand the pipeline. This is not speculation about Iranian intentions. It is the description of how every successful strategic logistics program in history has operated. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories running simultaneously in this situation, and the mainstream media is almost exclusively covering the one that is less important. The story that is being covered is the Israeli government's public statements about its interception capabilities, about its confidence in the defensive architecture, about its assessment that the threat remains manageable within current doctrinal frameworks. These statements are politically necessary. They serve a vital domestic function. No government in the world publicly announces that a core component of its national defense may be compromised in specific ways against specific threats. That is not how institutional communication works under any flag in any political system. The statement that needs to be made for public consumption is that the situation is under control. Whether or not the internal assessment matches that statement is a different question. The story that is not being covered is the internal assessment. And the internal assessment, according to multiple analysts with documented access to Western security consultations in the past week, is considerably more sober than the press releases reflect. There is a reason that American officials in the past 72 hours have been in quiet and serious communication with Israeli counterparts about supplemental defensive deployments and capability gaps. There is a reason that conversations about additional THAAD battery positioning in the region have resurfaced in planning discussions that were not happening at this level of urgency 3 weeks ago. There is a reason that the Iron Beam directed energy program is being discussed with a renewed timeline urgency that was not present before last week. These are not conversations you have when you are genuinely confident that the existing architecture is adequate to the current threat. The American public response has been a studied combination of public reassurance and private urgency. Officials have reaffirmed the commitment to Israeli security in the strongest possible terms, while simultaneously quietly accelerating discussions about what additional systems would need to be forward deployed if the threat assessment in the Northern Theater continues to evolve in the direction it has been moving. That is not the behavior of an alliance that genuinely believes its current defensive posture is fully sufficient. It is the behavior of an alliance that is managing public confidence in one register while managing operational deficiencies in another. Think carefully about what this represents for the populations living within Iron Dome's coverage area. If you live in a city that has been told, repeatedly and with official authority, that Iron Dome protects you from the rockets that are present in the hands of forces that are hostile to your country, the news that the system may have a structural vulnerability against a class of weapons that now exist in the operational inventory of those forces is not an abstract policy question. It is a personal one. It is about the calculation your government made on your behalf and whether that calculation still holds given the information that arrived in Lebanon last week. There is a historical parallel that illuminates this situation with a clarity that current events alone cannot provide. At Thermopylae, the Persian force did not fail because the Greeks possessed a stronger or more sophisticated army in any general sense. The Persian force was vastly superior in numbers, in material resources, in the range of its military options. It did not fail because of any deficiency in Persian military capability. It failed because the defensive position the Greeks chose so precisely negated the Persian numerical advantage that the specific theater had been reduced to a confrontation that favored the defender absolutely. The narrow pass was not a coincidence of terrain. It was a deliberate architectural choice that transformed an asymmetric numerical disadvantage into a tactical standoff of historic significance. What the Spartans understood, and what the Persian generals initially and fatally did not fully calculate, was that the architecture of the battlefield mattered more than the aggregate size of the force. The terrain was the weapon. Iron Dome was designed to be the Spartan Pass of the Northern Theater, a defensive architecture so well suited to the specific threat it faced that the attacker's numerical advantage in rocket inventory was neutralized. It worked brilliantly and demonstrably against the threat profile it was designed for. What last week's delivery represents is the discovery, or rather the operationalization, of a path around the pass. Not a frontal assault on the defensive system designed to overwhelm it through pure volume alone, a capability that changes the engagement geometry so fundamentally that the pass itself, the architectural choice that the defensive doctrine rested on, becomes less reliable as the foundation of a deterrence strategy. History does not repeat with mechanical precision, but it rhymes with a regularity that makes it genuinely indispensable to any honest analysis of how military architecture and deterrence actually function over time. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths forward, because there is no honest analysis that presents the current situation as static or that pretends comfortable middle ground options exist that do not. Path 1, technological response. The Israeli defense establishment, with American technical and financial support, accelerates the development and deployment of next-generation interception capabilities specifically designed to handle terminal phase maneuvering threats at operational volumes. This is plausible. The Israeli defense industry has an extensively documented track record of rapid and effective adaptation to new threat profiles. The Iron Beam directed energy program, which has been in various stages of development for years and which recently demonstrated limited operational capability in real engagement conditions, could in theory provide a complement to Iron Dome that addresses the specific vulnerability that last week's delivery has operationalized. The timeline for meaningful deployment of Iron Beam at the scale required to supplement Iron Dome coverage across the northern front is, however, measured in years rather than months. The capability that arrived in Lebanon last week exists and is available now. That asymmetry in timelines is not manageable through official reassurance alone. Path 2, preemptive degradation. Rather than waiting for the defensive calculus to be tested in a full-scale exchange, whose outcome is now less certain than the previous threat model suggested, a decision is made to degrade the capability before it can be fully operationalized across the forces that now possess it. This would require strikes against storage facilities, logistics nodes, crew training infrastructure, and the supply chain that delivered last week's consignment. This path carries escalation risks that previous Israeli decision-making has consistently weighed very carefully. The forces that enabled last week's delivery are not operating in a political vacuum. They have their own escalation options, their own response architectures, and the regional consequences of a significant preemptive strike against Lebanese territory are not clean or controlled variables. The experience of the last major exchange in this theater provided relevant data on how rapidly and in how many directions these situations can evolve beyond initial planning assumptions. Path 3, strategic recalibration. The most politically difficult path in the short term, but analytically the most rational one given the structural shift that last week represents. An honest acknowledgement, conducted through whatever institutional channels are available, that the defensive architecture that existed before last week no longer exists in the same form. That the threat environment has changed structurally, not temporarily, and not in a way that will reverse with time or patience. That the strategic posture needs to adapt accordingly, not through escalation or through managed public denial, but through a fundamental reassessment of what deterrence looks like and what it requires in an environment where the margin of the defensive advantage has narrowed in ways that are now empirically documented. My assessment is that elements of all three paths are going to be pursued simultaneously in the near term, with Path 1 and limited elements of Path 2 dominating the visible decision-making, while Path 3 remains the conversation that no current political leadership in the region has the bandwidth or the domestic political space to conduct openly. That pattern, tactical adaptation while avoiding strategic reassessment, is itself a recognizable historical pattern, and it has a consistent record of deferring the most important decisions until they become unavoidable rather than making them while options remain. Here are the questions I want you to carry away from this analysis. What does Iron Dome mean as a symbol and foundation of security if its operational effectiveness against the current, evolved threat profile is genuinely and structurally in question? What does it mean for regional deterrence architecture when a non-state actor possesses precision-guided munitions capable of meaningfully challenging the interception systems of a nuclear-armed state? And what does it tell us about the trajectory of the next 12 months in this conflict that the first significant week of that period included a delivery of this scale, this precision, and this strategic significance? Tell me in the comments what you think the response looks like in the next 30 days. Tell me whether you think the path to any stable equilibrium runs through escalation or through some form of negotiated framework. These are the questions that will determine what this region looks like by the end of the year, and they deserve more serious engagement than the official framing is currently providing. We will keep tracking every development in Lebanon, in the Northern Front, in the Iranian logistics network, and in the American and Israeli strategic response to what arrived last week. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening here, not the version being carefully managed for public consumption. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update. We will see you in the next analysis.